about what AI can be held accountable for, which of course is nothing. Um, it all comes down to the humans, so we can't outsource our management decisions to AI. Um, but it's a whole new area of consideration, and I'm sure people will have lots of interesting views on that. Um, Okay, so two really exceptional sessions to kick us off this morning, and our third one today, Scott Manning will be giving us a case study of moving from a single supplier environment to a multi-supplier ecosystem within the public sector. And with that, I'll hand over to Scott. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Mark. Morning, everybody. Yeah, some really good examples there with the two former presentations. Let's hope that mine can match that. So I'm going to give a little bit of a color warning as I share my screen. Just be aware it's going to be quite bright. Here we go. Yeah, nice, lovely bright orange for our color scheme. So what I'm going to look at today is a case study of SIAM in action, a very recent case study of some actions that our team have been doing within the public sector. Let me move on to a little bit of who we are, just in case you don't know who Apache IX are. We are about 66 strong employees, have offices in Bristol and Cambridge, and we deliver 7 capability-led services for the defence and other government departments and a bit of private sector contracts as well. And we recently transitioned over to be an employee-owned company back in November 24. What we provide is a bit of all these capabilities here: P3M, strategy, specialist P3M, a bit of business analysis, digital data sec ops. Sorry, my screen is in the way of the rest of my presentation. We move it out of the way. There we go. And a bit of cybersecurity. And part of our service delivery is on that we have teams of service managers that go in and deliver some service capability into client work, and we sort of host experts going into to do that. So based on that, this is what we're looking at. We've had teams deployed into some customer project teams, and we enhance that capability. So what we're going to look at today in the case study is onboarding a large multinational managed service provider within a governed customer ecosystem, and the service owner being the client. I'm going to use a standard sort of star format, providing a bit of situation, a bit of what we're after, the target, what kind of actions we did, what results, and then critically what lessons we've learned so we can move them on towards other projects. I'm going to look at is some topics within the case study today. So what the service integration was, the impact at the customer base and the scale and the complexity of what we were looking at, how we developed our team structure, how we looked at knowledge transfer, what the journey of onboarding looked like, our engagement activities, some of the conflicts and issues that we felt and dealt with throughout the way. A huge area around data and some of the lessons around data that was quite critical to the activities that we carried on throughout this project. The approvals, a bit of a handover, and sorry, my screen's still not letting me see everything. There we go, move that out of the way. And then what we achieved at the end. So just a bit of exposure information for the case study. I'm going to keep it as client and customer agnostic as I can. For those that know, that's fine, but I'm not going to mention who the client was or who the customer was, just to keep it nice and agnostic. Still actions happening in that realm, so I'm being fair to everyone on that one. I'll try and keep it light-hearted and fun. There might be some pictures along the way and some bits and pieces, so let's see how we get on. And it is all about integrating. No reference to the fact that my voice might go slightly Dalekian as I step through the presentation. Let's hope not. So we entered the customer journey. We had a journey map of the case study, which was pretty standard ecosystem journey. We prepared the solution a long time ago. We looked at discovery and how we were going to onboard the service provider. We went through the build and plan and build stage of what the services were going to look like. We then implemented those services and then ensured that the managed MSP then supported those services. So pretty basic, nice and easy journey. However, it did feel a little bit like that at times. So we did have a bit of a wiggle room around discovery, going plan and build, and then back to prepare, back to plan and build again, into implement, back to discovery. So it did take on a little bit of a spaghetti junction at some point. But in the end, it did turn out all nice and rosy, and we had a nice, smooth journey down a lovely coastal road. And that was because of the people. We had to engage a lot. We had a lot of collaboration, a lot of one team approach, and we built those relationships very strong. And it was because of those people that we got through that journey. So the situation, what we had, well, we had a consortium of MSPs originally on the contract. The contract was supporting around 20,000 end users, who were then supporting UK operations worldwide. We had a client who was a service owner within that organization, and we had a deadline. We had a consortium exit of that original consortium of managed service providers to remove themselves from the contract by sort of mid-2025. And if we didn't, we had some significant financial impact. So the pressure was on to get that going. We only had about a year to get that done, so quite a tight timeline. What threw a little bit of complexity into the mix was one of those MSPs from the original consortium actually won the contract as a single service provider. So they came in to replace all the other consortium MSPs and take on the rest of their contract areas and responsibilities. So it was a bit of a walk-in takeover plus, if you like. So it was an interesting transition. That required some knowledge transfer and also allowed for a little bit of tooling integration, and a further phase where we had to do further tooling integration, which this case study will expose as well. No reference to the fact that Scotty's going to beam me up, and that's my name, so I thought I'd show you on that one. So what we did to start, we had a project team and structure stand up. We had to look at the work streams that were aligned to our top level service requirements. So we had people assigned into work streams for tooling, bit of obsolescence, some service management performance, a bit of service improvement, service support, and there was a whole list of different work streams aligned to the service requirements at the top level. Our team from Apache had project and service managers, experts flown in to support the ecosystem customer. And we had around 10 of our people put in position across all of those work streams. We also then had an additional 5 internal and external project and live team representation from across the ecosystem and the MSP. The MSP also provided their own project team, which worked collaboratively with our team. And then on the third side of it, we also had the ecosystem governance onboarding team as well. So there was a sort of tripart of teams merging together and collaborating to ensure that the onboarding activities and the service integration was happening. In the early stages, we also had the outgoing MSP exit team as well. They were obviously part of the consortium, and like I said before, one of those consortium actually won the contract. So a lot of the knowledge transfer was just putting another hat on and improving the processes. The next part of that, then we had to establish the structure of what the teams were going to do on a nice cadence. Just an example there on the page, we had a sort of week 1, week 2 cadence of some of the things we had to consider and get through. So we had internal project reviews, some schedule reviews, a bit of a program overview that was jointly attended by all parties. We had some exit planning and some contract change boards, some transition technical coherence. However, what we noticed as we were stepping through these week on week out was they had to change. We didn't stick to this rigidly. Some of these things had to remain. Obviously, the program overview was the main one that carried on all the way through. Okay, give me a second. My screen has gone off. What's happened? Excuse me a second. My share has gone to standby. What's happened there? A minute. I now can't do anything. Hang on a minute, where's my screen gone? Apologies, everybody. So, so we try it again. It's being a pain. Right, can you still see my share?
It popped up briefly and then went away again.
Am I now okay? Am I sharing now or not?
No, can't see it currently.
Sorry, my other screens have given me a bit of a pain. Why have they done that? Bear with me, everyone.
Scott, let me know if you want me to share. I have ready if you need.
Okay, thank you. I'll be 2 seconds. Sorry, for some reason my other screens have decided to turn off, which is stopping me from making the presentation show. Give me a second. Just right, if I share.
You can run it from Maria's if helps.
Right, that should be coming back. Are we
Yep,
back?
there we go. That's
Right,
back.
apologies, everybody. I don't know what happened there.
So-
My two screens are connected. Stopped me from sharing. Right, apologies. I'm back on. Okay. Yeah, sorry. As I was mentioning, the weekly cadence of our meetings did change. We didn't stick rigidly to this. Obviously, we had certain things that we had to continue to do. So program overview, that kind of stuff, we had to make sure we kept in the diary all the time. But as we stepped through a lot of the onboarding and integration of the MSP, things changed. So exit planning obviously removed. We had contract change board that got removed as things progressed. But the overall sort of output of what we were looking for, we had a lot of documents to update. We had 23 process documents to make sure the MSP were uh, aligned to and made sure they matched the service management requirements. We also had protocol documents, major incident point of contact forms, and over 130 technical documents. All had to be reviewed, uplifted, and ready for service acceptance. And they were put through in different milestones. So just a bit of an example of how we sort of put this team and structure together. So what we did, effectively, we started a bit of an outgoing knowledge transfer action. So we had a lot of contract conformance meetings to attend. We looked at each of these service requirements to make sure that the response from the initial tender was captured and was applicable. We had joint outgoing and incoming MSP knowledge transfer workshops where both parties attended. In fact, all parties attended and ensured that all of the processes and all of the information, data sharing, knowledge, and everything else in the service provision catalog, everything was fully understood and known as to what was happening now, as to what was going to happen during service transition and acceptance. Like I said, as one of the MSPs was the original consortium members, they also had a key part to play by changing their hats and carrying on with the rest of the service. So it's an interesting knowledge transfer part on that as well. For this phase, we had a minimal tooling or infrastructure change, so it was focused mainly around the service acceptance and service changing from one consortium supplier to a single supplier. However, as we stepped through this, we realized that tooling did have to change. So we had some areas where we had some minimum data set to apply, and you'll see what we did with that in a minute. As part of the knowledge transfer, we also had some handover presentation packs presented by the outgoing MSP into the service and also into the new MSP incoming. We had a lot of the process documentation to be handed over, a whole load of knowledge-based articles to review and update within the tooling to make sure obviously the service levels were correct and all the knowledge that was there for the service center to use were appropriate and were aligned to the new service. That also included templates for incidents as well. So a lot of the templates that were being driven for the service center to ask the end users specific questions had to then realign to make sure they went down the right resolver group queues and what have you. So we had all that to prepare. And I've already mentioned service level agreements as well on the tool sets. As we started the actual the onboarding journey, we had to do a lot of scoping. So we had to understand the client base, how many users we were serving, how many users were out there using the service, how many service lines we're going to be looking at, whether the tooling and testing was going to be needed. And that gave us a good steer of how long the testing was going to be, how long the onboarding journey was going to take, and who we needed to engage with. And that opened the door to engagements. So who within the service we needed to speak to, who we needed to keep on board, who we needed to get approvals from, and we started all that journey as well. We conducted some good gap analysis of the current processes versus what was required within an objective-based service management framework. That allowed a lot of the teams to start nice early work on process alignment, which as we entered the process alignment meetings, focused on what areas were missing, what needed to be enhanced, what processes were meeting the mark, so nice and easy sign off. I would say predominantly most of them did need updating. It's the last time that they looked at a lot of the processes was probably about 5 or 6 years ago when the first contract was aligned, and obviously service management frameworks moved on quite heavily since then. We also had workshops for the incoming supplier, so they could see what the service levels were, what the service owner wanted, what kind of reporting was needed, and also a lot of tooling alignment. So one of the areas within the process alignment meetings was to ensure that if we were going to change tooling, how that was going to be attacked, how the data was going to be needed, in what form the data was going to come in, how it's going to be discovered across the system. So there's a lot within that early process alignment meetings that allowed us to configure the rest of the workshops. As part of the onboarding journey, then we also had to get sign-off, we had to get the approvals from the Ecosystems Governance Board. And to do that, we had to step through something called the operational acceptance criteria. That was basically a big spreadsheet of all questions around each of the areas within the ITIL framework that gave the MSP and the service the evidence required to gather all of the information and get a sign off to say that yes, you're good to test, or yes, you're good to go live. That was probably the majority of the work that was within the onboarding journey. Part of that was also to get a lot of the processes uplifted, get all that sign off, and make sure that those processes were not only fit for purpose but fit for use. Not just a bit of paper, they actually had to do something, and the people that were operating those processes knew that that was going to happen. So obviously the training and all of the knowledge transfer was there and in place. We then entered a little bit of early life support, about 4 to 5 week set of early life support, where all the process owners within the ecosystem had defined areas that they had to step through and make sure that the managed service provider were certainly compliant. And also those 130 tech documents had to be delivered, operating manuals, business continuity design and disaster recovery plans. All of those things had to be completed, and they were done so accordingly. So a bit of an example of what the criteria might look like. As I said, they were split down into different areas. So incident, problem, change, service asset configuration. And the questions that were aligned to that included things like, have the use cases been defined? Have all the processes been uplifted? Has a problem function welcome pack been issued? Have in-flight problem records been addressed? And it was down to our team within the project team to facilitate those evidence gathering with the managed service provider to provide them into the ecosystem to make sure that that had been signed off and was ready. So very simple, nice and easy tool to use, was very human-centric. Certainly nothing AI about this in any way, but it worked, and it allowed us to get the sign-off that we needed to ensure that their MSP was compliant with all of the requirements within the service management framework. We had a lot of engagement and collaboration activities. The project team did a lot of lean-ins, taking away some of the more complex areas away from the live services team into the project to allow them to focus on current situations. We did manage to build up some really positive working relationships with both the managed service provider that was coming in and the customer and the onboarding team within the governance. That was mainly done through a lot of socials, maybe some leaving dues, some summer and winter celebrations, some milestone achievement meals and what have you. So all the social interactions were key to making those positive working relationships carry on, and it was effective and it did work. Also, there's a lot of social value initiatives. The managed service provider had some educational outreach programs to enter. They were quite influential within the contract, and it allowed a lot of the team to employ new people, bring them into the contract, and actually make a positive output to what's happening within the new service. We did have some complications and some conflict resolution to continue, as most projects do. Documentation reviews took a little bit longer than we thought in some areas. Maybe there were some complications or confusions around what the process was meant to be, who was meant to be running those processes, whether those processes were actually going to be fit for purpose, and whether the tooling was going to support that. So it took a little bit longer to get through some of those areas, but with some good management and obviously having established that positive working relationship, we did manage to get through all of the documentation reviews just about in time. Test defects was quite heavy. We had a lot of testing to go through. So we had a system integration testing and user acceptance testing phases to enter. We did notice that there were a lot of test defects around some of the data modeling that was coming in. That was also supported by the fact that processes needed to catch up on that. So a lot of the documents that were reviewed and processed that didn't need any tooling interaction initially found out that we actually did need some tooling interaction. So documentation then had to go back and step 3 through some of the process alignment again. But test defects were quite heavy on the first initial stages, as expected. We wanted that mainly so we could see where, as soon as we entered user acceptance testing, it was going to be a smooth ride. What we didn't account for is how long that test portal was going to be. The contract had to be extended a little bit just to make sure that we had enough time to test fully as we were integrating 2 tools into one. Data was one of the key areas that we had to focus on. So we had a lot of areas where we had data loading trackers established. We had to make sure we had all of the people data in there, all of the SLA data, all of the operation and production and resolution categories all aligned. We had a lot of the CI and asset data within data capture forms that had a lot of mandatory and non-mandatory fields. That all had to be version controlled and make sure that the MSP was compliant and discovering their data across and their assets across the estate and entered into these forms. Catalog management data sets also had a huge piece of work around that. We had quite a bit of service, about 300 services within the catalog itself, all of which needed the workflows arranged, the question sets arranged and agreed, the descriptions and the SLAs all to be configured. And a lot of the resolver groups that were currently in the tooling were obviously legacy. They had to be removed, and a lot of the ticket cutover planning also had to be arranged, ready for the new service to take over. Another piece of data which we're still working on, but there's some good work going on at the moment. But the event and capacity management thresholds was a key area that required a lot of the tooling to catch up. So at the moment, we're currently working on the fact that event management data is as we see it, not real time, but there's work going on to try and get real time event data into the project. So data has been an absolute key area within our service integration. Some of the examples that we had with data issues on our minimum data set, we had some mandatory versus non-mandatory fields. That led to an assumption that the managed service provider had only to worry and configure the mandatory fields. And they ignored and didn't worry about the non-mandatory fields. That led to a bit of confusion within the testing, as we realized very quickly that had they configured the non-mandatory fields as well, or we had told them to configure the non-mandatory fields as well, then testing would have been absolutely fine. So there was a lot of assumptions made that only the mandatory fields were required, which was not the case. We also had some examples there where the data capture form for the asset and CI information, there were several versions out there used by different ecosystem suppliers. The version that we were compliant with, or had to be compliant with, was one step back from the version that was just about to be published. It changed the amount of mandatory fields required. It changed the field configuration. It changed how many characters were meant to be in each field. Little sort of things like that. That had a big impact on how the tooling was going to be adjusted, as there was only one tool within the ecosystem to comply with. They had to make sure that tool was up to date with the most current version of the data capture form. Unfortunately, the data capture form was one step back, so the tooling wasn't quite aligned to how the data was coming in. So it's a bit of an example of how smaller version change can happen and then can affect tooling going forward. We also had an issue with the catalog SLA alignment. Each catalog service where there was multiple MSPs involved had several tasks. So task one might go to one of the MSPs to do some network part of the task. Another MSP will then move the task on to the next MSP, who would then do some delivery. That task then will be closed down and moved on to the next person in the chain in the workflow. Initially, when the SLA for the entire service was set up, let's say it was 7 days, the initial task was set for a 1-day resolution. The following task could be a 3-day resolution, and then the final task being the rest of the remaining time is a 4-day resolution. That was fine, but as we experienced some changes within the service, we had to put some technical change requests in to get some of the services realigned. Some of the descriptions changed, some of the SLAs changed. That all went through contract compliance and was signed off. Unfortunately, a little bit of a mishap and a slip in the fact that the SLAs individually per task weren't then recalculated, which very quickly was identified during testing. So it was a very simple fix, just had to realign and recalculate the individual task SLAs. Had we spotted that originally and understood that the catalog was operating like that, then we could have caught that a little bit earlier on. But some good examples there of how detailed some of this information needs to be. Incident templates and SLA timing load sheets were also per contract. So a lot of the tooling areas within the ecosystem single tool had to make sure that the templates were per contract, named so, had the right information to ask the end users the certain set of questions. They had to be aligned and ready for the service center to be able to pick those templates as the users were calling. If those weren't loaded properly and didn't have the right question sets, then obviously things would, the information wouldn't flow down to the MSP to be able to deal with and diligently respond. So a lot of flow back of tickets going backwards and forwards to just gain the right information. So incident templates was another key area where we had to get that right. Another quite interesting one was public comment sharing within a multi-MSP catalog service. It's a bit of an edge case for us on this one. We had two MSPs that were dealing with two very different parts of the service requirement or service request when a user was, for example, asking for a print service. That print service required some network actions to happen on one MSP. And when they've done that, it moves the task on to the next MSP to do some delivery tasks of that print, or maybe set up a print queue. However, due to the fact that both of those MSPs were operating their own ITSM tool outside of the ecosystem's ITSM tool, there was no way to share public comments across those tasks. because they both did not have access to the high level work order on the catalogue. It was an easy fix. In the end, only took about 3 weeks to actually get some translation of public sharing comments within the one tool. However, it did delay some testing, and it was an edge case we've not seen before. Everywhere else in the ecosystem, with all the ecosystem suppliers, had their own, or at least one of those MSPs had access to the ecosystems tooling. So never became a problem, only became an issue within this project. So it was an interesting edge case to deal with. And a rather funny one that we had to deal with as well was a spelling mistake, where I've realised I spelt the word mistake wrong. It created a bit of a translation and mapping error, and the word had to be spelt incorrectly on the MSP's tooling to allow us to work. That again was only spotted by some deep investigation as testing continued. So an interesting and very critical spelling mistake led to some test defects. Overall, though, as we stepped through the onboarding, we had gated approvals to get completion of the operational acceptance criteria signed off by all the process owners. We had our gate 1 approval to test services approved. We then had to step through another round of the operational acceptance criteria to get an approval to go live with all the service provision, and then another round of the operational service criteria to approval to exit the early life support. It was a pragmatic approach by all parties. The ecosystem knew that there was a lot of things to fall outside of these gates or fall outside of the operational acceptance criteria. So there were some caveats and there were some restrictions about some of the criteria that were being met or not, but they were provided within a sign-off agreement that an action-based case study was risen against each of the areas that needed to be conducted. So the MSP then had things to do after the effect. We had a lot of process level documentations, approvals all signed off in the end. All the technical documentation was signed off. We also had security and infrastructure control owner sign off. And then finally, the service owner gave us the approval that we could go live. One of the key areas that we had to make sure that we didn't forget was that handover. So we, as the project team, had to make sure that the engagement and interaction with the live teams that were going to operate the service as the escalation routes were included all the time. So through early life support, we continued to include the live team within project level meetings. They were part of the work streams. They were part of the workshops throughout the projects. So there was no big surprises when it did come to handover time. We ensured that they were prepared with the knowledge articles and they were part of the sign off for each knowledge article. So they knew what was being instructed by the service center to support the end user. They're also involved in a lot of the testing cycles as actors. So they knew exactly what was being tested, how it was being tested, and that it was going to be sufficient for end users when it came to service delivery. They also provided some test resources and tooling access as well. And the documentation sign-off approvals, they're all part of that. So as a through-life handover, instead of a big bang and sort of shovel-drop approach, we managed to get the handover to live teams a nice, smooth process. We had lots of lessons as we went along the way. We realized we couldn't focus on data assumptions and the fact that we can't make any data assumptions. We had to very quickly learn that data was the key area to get right. If data wasn't in the right position, it wasn't in the right format, wasn't provided at the right time, then it affected a lot of the areas of testing, a lot of the areas of service provision. We very quickly learned that we had to establish our stakeholders nice and early, and keep them engaged and keep them informed if things were slipping, or keep them engaged if things were moving ahead nice and early, which sometimes they did. Also, a big lesson was to keep those positive working relationships and working environments throughout that work and make it a collective responsibility to do so. We couldn't rely or shouldn't be relying on one person or one team to make that positive working relationship continue. It was a joint responsibility to do that. A big lesson that we learned was plan more time, we think, for testing. Testing was a key area for service integration and management, certainly when there was tooling interactions happening. So having enough time to test and to do defect resolution and regression testing was key for us, and we did have to extend our contract a little bit just to make sure we accounted for that. And then also another lesson is that we made sure that we prepared our risks and aligned them to our schedule. Without doing that, risk could very quickly be turned into issues and not be resolved, and would affect where the schedule landed and where milestones were being achieved or not. Not saying that happened, but it is a good lesson to learn as we were stepping through. In the end, what we collectively achieved was the consortium did exit, and we were 6 months ahead of schedule for that exit. We managed to save the customer over £32 million across the life of the contract. We increased the customer feedback results from 56 to 77% in just 4 months, which is a great achievement. We had over 150 process and technical documentations uplifted. The MSP were compliant with the ecosystem governance and frameworks. We had managed to get an increase in system patching compliance from 65 to 99% in 7 months. And we managed to ingest 1.2 million assets and CIs from the environment via the MSP into the ecosystem tooling, which was the first time that's ever been done in 6 years on that system. And collectively achieved a professional working relationship with the MSP, which hopefully will last long into the future. That's my case study. Apologies for the bit of a mishap in the middle there. If there's any questions, happy to take them now or as we go into the next part.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Scott. Very useful case study that. Lots of detail in there. Excellent session. There are a couple of questions there in the chat, specifically about your session, about the number of services, who manages identified risks, and managing changed services there. I don't know if you wanted to comment on those at all.
Sorry, my chat has restarted itself. Can you just repeat the question again? So
okay, so I think the first one was on the how many services were involved overall.
Okay, so we had effectively 25 services. There were 300 or so services on the catalog for users to request. They will have to be realigned, but the services that were being offered by the MSP to account were about 25. So that ranged from event management through incident, major incident, problem, the full suite of ITIL services and customer satisfaction and what have you. So it's the full range of all the ITIL services.
Okay, thank you. Who has to manage and track the identified risks? Is it the SIAM lead, or do you assign a dedicated project manager for this?
So within the project, we had a program lead who was responsible for tracking and managing the risks and the schedule. They were part of the project team that we flew in from Apache, and we worked again collaboratively with the MSP and the service owner. But effectively, it was our team, it was our project team that was leading the schedule and the risks.
Brilliant, thank you. And how did you address changing services, i.e., new services, if any, being designed and or introduced, existing services being changed or retired?
Yeah, so the original project was split into 2 phases. We had phase 1, which was a walk-in takeover, and effectively that was meant to be where there was no change to any service. In reality, there was a lots of change in some of the services. Some of the change enablement had to be uplifted. Some of the obsolescence had to be uplifted. So as we were stepping through a lot of the process alignment meetings, that's where the identification of some of the gaps in the process were clearly seen. And then from those process alignment meetings, we then entered a lot of workshops with not only the service owner, but the incoming MSP to delve out what the new process should be, what it should look like, and whether it should be compliant. That led to a lot more of the detailed workshops and tooling integrations that followed. We had to make sure that one, the service was going to be fit for purpose for the user, which required the live services team to be on hand to listen in, but also compliant with the service management framework that was being governed. So it was known quite originally, quite early on, how many services were going to be initially changed or initially implemented as new services. So within the project and their response, we knew roughly what that was going to look like. As we stepped through, there was a lot of services, as I said, there, the change enablement, obsolescence, SIAM, some of the availability and capacity performance and management sort of measurement services, which took on a bigger change than we first anticipated. So effectively working with the process owners in the governance areas and also working with the MSP service management run team, we all had to come to a pragmatic solution. And by having those positive working relationships, made it a lot easier to do that. So yeah, that's how we managed a lot of that.
Brilliant, thank you. Do you do any long-term benchmarking with customers to see if those uplifts in metrics are sustained over 18 to 24 months?
So yes, we do. So the benchmarking is done by obviously a lot of the service reporting. So as we step through a lot of the CSLs and KMs, we knew where we were from the beginning. We knew what the outgoing MSPs and consortiums were currently being delivering. So we knew we had a lot of the change a lot of the SLAs that were now part of the new contract had to be achieved. So we knew what we were currently baselined at, and then how we were going to look to improve those came in as we carried on through the project. For the future, for the next 24 months, part of that question is still ongoing. We're probably about 2/3 of the way through, so we've got the baseline already established. We just now need to carry on and assess that those improvements are happening. But the early indication so far with that patching result and the customer satisfaction result is a good indication of where we managed to kick off from.
Excellent. Sorry, don't quite understand that question, Tim. You're asking how many business services are seen
Yeah,
by users?
yeah. Sorry, I slightly misworded, or Scott may have misunderstood what I was asking. So when I was saying about the number of services that were involved in the during the switch from one set of MSPs to another one, I didn't mean so much the ITIL processes. It was more about the number of business services, the applications that end users would typically associate themselves with, like payroll and HR, etc. I mean, 10, 20, 50, 100. Just get an idea of the scale, really. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
I think so, yeah. So I've just realised that my chat was on a different function. So you've said how many business services or application systems are seen by users. Okay, right. So
Yeah.
we had effectively for the end users, they had the full sort of suite of all Microsoft sort of application and workspace collaborative workspace services. They had all the sort of standard MS products and Teams and software that could be loaded onto their machines and what have you.
Yeah.
They also had collaborative workspace allowed on there. It's quite a restrictive system, so they
Okay.
they weren't allowed certain things, and it had to be all the applications had to be onboarded appropriately. So we have
Yeah.
applications
Okay.
and services to cover that.
Okay. So shadow IT presumably was, given what you say about the environment, I can probably imagine which one it might have been, probably less of an issue than it might have been in a commercial organization, shall I say?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. It's very tightly controlled as to what was allowed on the system or what wasn't.
Understood. Okay. Brilliant. Thanks, Scott.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks again, Scott, for that. I think that kind of brings us to the end of the questions specifically about that session. We have a little time left in the agenda. If anybody has any other comments or views they'd like to share, any other questions, I mean, feel free at this stage to come off mute if you'd prefer to discuss it in person. Please can the panel comment on the approach for governance and control when technology services are delivered via BPO providers, not direct suppliers to IT. So if we still have Steph and Siobhan as well, I don't know if anybody wanted to pick up on that one.
Hi, Mark. I can probably help, sorry, with that one. So please can the panel comment on the approach for governance and control delivered via BPO providers, not direct? Sorry.
Right, Sharon, I can probably give a bit more background to that if you want.
Yeah, please.
It's where obviously it's a BPO, it's a business process outsourcing contract where the business is contracted a full service. Part of that service includes obviously the people, but it also includes IT systems that, are necessarily integrated with some of our other systems. But the contract's held by the business, so it's possibly not, a bit more difficult to. I don't know if anybody's any experience of that in trying to get BPO providers to be recognised as part of the ecosystem, for example.
Can't say I've worked in that. I'd be lying if I said I've done that before.
No worries.
But I'm wondering if Steph or Claire, Agatha, if they're still on the call, if they know or have seen that before. Don't know, Claire, if you have.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So we have seen similar things in the past. It depends on the contract structure. So if, for example, you've got a BPO organization that is then subcontracting multiple services, from a SIAM perspective, really the main relationship is with the BPO organization, and they're expected to almost transparently manage their subcontractors. So in effect, you get kind of a nested SIAM setup. But then the other thing that we're seeing is kind of an enterprise SIAM approach coming. So SIAM then extends its reach beyond IT, and the BPO contracts are actually folded into the SIAM model. So it kind of depends what the commercial structure is. But yes, there are examples of that and mechanisms for dealing with it. And I'd be happy to chat about that after the event, Sharon, if there's
that'd be
something
fab.
specific.
Thanks, Claire. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Any other views? Anybody think AI should be held accountable for bad management decisions? No. Nothing coming forward. Okay. Great. Well, I'll give you a little bit of your day back then. Just leaves me to thank our speakers again, Steph and Siobhan and Scott, for 3 really excellent sessions today. And as Steph mentioned, there's lots of SIAM related content out there, and I'm sure a lot of people will be diving into the AI compendium after the session today. So if you have any questions, just let us know. We can always pass them on to the speakers, or do follow Scopism's links to the SIAM related content. If AI is your particular area of interest, ITSMF have several events coming up, one of which was just advertised this morning on AI in the higher education sector, but that's open for everybody to attend. Some really good content on that session too. So thank you once again for attending, and thank you to our speakers.